Hi and welcome to Section 7, Microsoft Access, introducing you to VBA programming. A quick introduction to VBA. In this video I'll be covering the following. What is Access VBA? Cover an overview of VBA code in a module. Know where Access VBA code is triggered. Know the key differences between macros and modules. And understand the mindset of a programmer. Let's get started. What is Access VBA? VBA stands for Visual Basic for Application, the application being of course Microsoft Access, and is a programming tool used for Access databases and other Microsoft applications, including the likes of Word and Excel, sharing the same language. It's a powerful programming language compared to Access macros, which uses a different language altogether. By comparison, this is a top level of automation for your Access database, and is typically used to fill the gaps in your database, for example, any missing functionality. There is no need to be a programmer to learn Access VBA. Here is an overview of Access modules, which I will be going into more detail in this section over the next few videos. A module is a place where VBA code is stored. You can create modules for the navigation pane, which means these are your general VBA code procedures. They can also be stored in forms as they have their own modules, as well as reports too, which changes the scope of your VBA code procedures. You cannot run a module from the navigation pane as it only has a design view mode. VBA code must be triggered elsewhere. A piece of VBA code looks like this. A very basic example, but it's written in a text editor, in some sort of English literacy form. So a module is really just a text editor screen with tools to build your code. Triggering VBA code will require some assistance, as it's not an Access object we've been used to so far. As already mentioned, you cannot run a module from the navigation pane, only gain access to the design of a module. It needs an event to trigger any VBA code from the modules. Events are therefore instances the system listens for and waits for it to happen, like Access objects, where VBA code can be attached to forms and reports and their respective events, like when it opens, loads or prints. Macros can also call VBA code too, using the run code action, making the best of both, working together and easier to build. In each form, the controls like a command button, combo box and many others have their own events, the most common one being a command button when clicked. Each of the controls have plenty of other events. They can be attached with VBA code. These are accessible via the property sheet. And VBA code can also be tested and debugged directly within the Visual Basic editor while it's being developed. We will be covering some examples later in other videos. Before you get tempted to do everything using just VBA code, and by the way this is possible, you should know where Access objects stop and VBA code takes over. We have discovered that Access macros are quite powerful and takes care of the general functions in Access, like opening forms and printing reports. To get a clearer picture, let's quickly run through the differences to help decide which one to use. The first thing to note is to take the view that users should try to adopt a working default, macros then VBA code, and use macros as much as possible as your first stop, and then only consider VBA code as a top-up, filling in the missing gaps. It's a very general rule, but will set the standard for your automation. It starts to get a little confusing when you need to know how your database will be distributed. For internal use, macros and VBA code works well, as you can security trust everything. External use, however, may not allow VBA code to be used, and can be switched off, leaving only macros. In addition, you need to consider the security therefore, and that your VBA code is allowed to be used and safe. What level of functionality will be required, as not all functions in macros can easily be achieved, leaving the only choice of VBA. It's fair to say that the new releases of Microsoft Access has narrowed the gap, making macros more flexible. So different versions will be a decision too. The latest version is very adaptable now. What level of error handling do you aim for? Again, newer versions are much better with the introduction of error handling and variables, as we've already discussed in previous videos. But higher level error procedures may still direct to VBA code. Communicating with other applications is quite a big decision if you intend to communicate with other external processes. then you really only have one option, VBA code being the solution. VBA code can talk to many outside systems using referencing, which macros do not host. Do you need to build a custom function? Access has many built-in functions which can easily be used, but once again, you may need to build a very specialized function that you wish to use across your Access objects. That means VBA code will provide the tools here for you. Do you need to interrogate beyond the design side of your objects? As already alluded, if you really want to interrogate an Excel spreadsheet, for example, or even another database system like an accounting system, VBA code is your only choice. Do you need to manipulate one record at a time instead of record sets? We've seen data macros working and looping through records, which is great, but a high level of iteration and control flows are better suited in VBA and can be used via other Access objects, not just restricted to events in a table. So, macros or VBA? You need to think about the level of work here before you get down to writing and editing any VBA code. Why not consider using both together, which of course is possible, and get that good balance? The mindset of the VBA programmer. We need to start by establishing a frame of reference as to what you should expect when writing VBA code. Consider this scenario whereby you command a person to open the door. Think about all the individual action that it takes to accomplish this one statement. The person has to approach the door, align the hand with the door knob, move the hand and grasp it around the doorknob, and then twist and turn the door knob while swinging an arm in an arc motion. When working on a computer, it is helpful to remember that computers have to be instructed, basically shown all the way of how you want things done. Be clear, the first thing to remember about computers are they cannot do what you didn't tell them to do. Therefore, to ask the computer to open the door is meaningless until you actually define the exact steps required to accomplish this task. You can't rely on the computer to observe and understand the act of opening the door as a person would. Fortunately, you can build upon the work done by other programmers. So, for example, when you want to display a little message box saying, "Hello World," you can use a single line of code or an instruction as shown. This combines programming done by others with something you want said in the message box. Behind the scenes, the instruction, the command message box, goes through several steps. It instructs the computer how to draw the box, how to position it, what buttons to put on it, and how to style it. All of those details are abstracted away from us, which makes our task so much easier. Knowing that the computer needs every step to be defined, you can appreciate the benefits of being able to leverage existing programming commands to write your own code. But it's still upon you to supply the missing pieces, like the actual message, "Hello World," and other parameters. Remembering the general rule that it can't do what you didn't tell it to do, and is invaluable when programming. When writing code, you are working with a type of program called a compiler, which is responsible for translating the VBA language into machine language that the computer can understand and execute. As you write VBA code, the compiler provides feedback on whether statements are valid and free of any syntax or structural errors. When discussing how the computer will react, we often refer to the compiler, or what is more commonly known as the VBA editor. Remember, you don't need to be a programmer to learn Access VBA. To summarize then, you now know what Access VBA is, been given an overview of VBA code in a module, seen where Access VBA code are triggered, know the key differences between macros and modules, and discussed the mindset of a programmer.